Okay, well, thank you for joining us downstairs in the breakout room. This session's a panel session. We're going to be inviting the panel members to talk about the telecoms industry. Thank you for joining us at Digital Isle 2022. It's great to see so many people here. Key to the panel session really is to just try and stimulate some conversation. If you do have any questions throughout the session, please either send them through the Slido, or we will be roaming with the microphone later on if anyone wants to put their hand up and ask a question. We've got a fantastic panel here today. We've got, they tell me, over a century of experience between them. A real mix of experience across the telecom sector. We've got Don Stewart at the end there, 24 years at Manx Telecom. Don is the, let me get this right, head of interconnected technology, is that correct? Integrated technology solutions at Manx Telecom, develops strategic roadmaps, provides leading business technical solutions. Then we've got Roberta Castle. She's the Chief Commercial Officer at Elite Group. 20 years experience in the industry, locally and internationally, so we look forward to seeing what she has to say. Steve Trimble's next. Steve is the Chief Operating Officer at Constant 8 Technologies. Again, over 20 years experience in the industry. And then finally, last but not least, is Shelley Langdon. She's the Chair of the Chamber of Commerce for the Digital Forum. And again, a lot of years experience in a number of different industries in telecommunications. So a lot of years experience. No, not the young face of the panel. So a lot of years experience on communications infrastructure, connectivity. We want to talk about how those things might make the Isle of Man a place to be, a place to set up your business, how we can work on a global stage. And before I go into questions, I've already mentioned, please ask your questions through the Slido. So the first question really is, I'm going to speak to Don first, 24 years in Manx Telecom, so you'll know this, hopefully, like the back of your hand. How have you seen the telecoms industry evolve over the last few decades, and how has it grown to form part of the island's ecosystem?
Okay, so to begin with, I think the world has changed. Our workforce, our employees, our businesses are all global now, right? And what's driven that is connectivity. And the telecom sector and communication service providers have been behind that. First of all, the technology has evolved rapidly, and that's been coupled with a change in the way our businesses organise themselves. So let me just elaborate on that a bit. Connectivity is the underlying baseline, right? Data, quality, mobile, fixed, always on, fast. That's the underpinning technology now, okay? And then we've reorganised over the top of that to provide communication services, to provide digital services, to provide managed services. We've got big players like Microsoft and cloud all providing services over the top of that connectivity. So there's been a disaggregation between the technology that underlies it and then the services that go over the top of that. And that has driven a tech-savvy audience, right? Years ago, people didn't care about technology, they didn't care about, they just wanted it to work. Now we have people, we still have people who don't care, to be honest, but we've got people who do care, and we've got people who are aware, who are savvy, who are expert, okay? I think the benefit of that is twofold. One, it's given our customers the ability to flexibly consume those services, okay? And because they're willing to self-serve, we can expose those services digitally, okay? So that's the benefit. As with everything, there are challenges there, okay? One of the challenges is security, okay? Telecoms now has to deal with security vectors that we've never had to deal with before. We were a closed shop, we trusted each other, we're now globally interconnected to China, to South Korea is a friend, North Korea, etc. So security is a big challenge for us. The second part of that is that while we've got disaggregation of services, our customers, especially business customers, are really still want a seamless service between that. They want one throat to choke. So as a business, we've kind of disaggregated internally, but we still have to present an aggregated front end to the customer. And I think the last piece, and then I'll hand over, the last challenge is that underlay is now critical national infrastructure. It's critical personal infrastructure. the loss of it can be hugely damaging to business, to our economy, to our social cohesion at a personal level. And this is the worst case, it can cost lives, okay? To keep that infrastructure to a level of world class requires investment in an ever-decreasing pool of return on investment. So, competition is great, and I'm an advocate of competition, but we always need to manage the risk of that dilution of the pool because we need that investment. So that's my view.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on, or sort of go back into the middle of about what you were saying, but I think when the connectivity advancements have come along, it's actually driven innovation as well. So it's people look at they didn't dream that they could have created an application that now uses this specific faster connectivity, and as soon as it's there, then you get innovators going, oh, what can we do with this? So I think the pace of change is obviously rapid in the world, but actually in telecoms it is also quite slow sometimes when we're still using copper, and we're sort of transitioning to fibre now, but yeah, some of the underlying technology is actually just built upon what you were saying.
I think for me, one of the really key changes that we've seen in recent years is changes in behaviour. So telecoms hasn't, yes, we have to innovate, yes, we have to make sure that we've got world-class infrastructure, but how people use it has changed. So the expectation has changed. If we were sat here 5 years ago, we would be banging the drum to say that our connectivity is the best, we've got 5 data centres, all world-class, etc. Those really aren't differentiators anymore, they are expected. People treat telecoms now like a utility, like water, turn on the tap, you expect your telecoms to be there. And so the behaviour change is the thing that we've had to adapt to. Subtle things like previously landline phones, were a huge revenue stream for most telecom. That obviously dipped with the advent of mobile. And people now aren't using mobile calling, they're using WhatsApp or Messenger, etc. And so these behaviour changes are, I suppose, one of the biggest adaptations. And as those things have changed, with the expectation that, of an always-on situation, puts a lot of pressure on the telcos.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, going back to what Don said there, that the challenge is, isn't it, around there's ever increasing demands for this, and the expectation of all consumers is there, but the issue is as well that the margin is being pushed all the time. Constantly, people expect it to be cheaper, particularly difficult here in the Isle of Man when the population is limited. So, we see companies now trying to go outside of here. Continent's a great example of that, where they started here and are obviously a very global company, and Telecom and ourselves, others evolving product sets that are outside of the Isle of Man to try and support that. It is really difficult, and we're constantly, all of us, many of you in this room will be aware of this is actually a difficult panel to do on the basis that we're constantly getting a lot of grief around what happens here on the island, and so we do understand, and stability of the service is absolutely key, but it's also challenging when, investment has to be made into this, and it's difficult because there is a huge amount of cost and margins are pushed every single day.
No, thank you. I picked up on your point there, Shelley, where you said that the speed of change has been quick in some respects and maybe slow in others. We saw COVID as a time that changed the way people worked. They all disappeared and worked from home. Did that create any challenges, do you think, in the digital providers, and how did they cope with that, and what's the impact been for the sector?
You were looking at me a lot then, so I thought I better answer. At the time of COVID, I was actually in telecoms, which I'm not now, but the networks that I was part of overseeing were not actually, they actually stood up really well in networking. Obviously, you plan for your peak times, which are, things like, a wrestling match at 2 a.m, and football where everyone's streaming. That streaming is a really high demand service on a telco's network. So actually, if you're just on a computer at work and then you go home and you're on a computer, it's the same demand that you're actually having on the network. But I think the way that we, obviously, some things that we might not have seen is some aspects around digital poverty. So people not having access to computer equipment, for example, to be able to get on there because they don't have that at home because they were always at school using it or at college, and that was a big problem outside of the telcos sort of sphere as being able to help, but sort of a wider social problem.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Stephen says, that the usage changed considerably. We were all working from home, and whilst I agree that we're still using the same amount of bandwidth, it was in a different structure. Obviously, if you're working in a central Douglas office that's well provisioned with dedicated internet bandwidth, it is different to the level of contentions and things we're using at home. So I think that change in usage, to be honest, the island stood up pretty well. I don't think we were in a position, there wasn't many situations where people were saying they had coverage at home, people were out of it. I agree with your comment, Shelley, around it was difficult around the social aspects of it, that everyone didn't have access, but not so the telcos. That is something that obviously government are trying to ask the telcos to look at, and I think we touch upon that a little bit later as part of it.
John, obviously from a Banks Telecom point of view as the incumbent, you must have seen quite a bit of a challenge through COVID.
We did, but like Shelley says, we have to build for peak, right? So I'm quite proud at how well our combining experts all stood up to that. It's not just about having the devices, it's having the right device. I remember my 11-year-old son trying to run a team school meeting on his mobile phone because the other son had the only laptop in the house and he was on a class. Right? But we kept our children's education going. We allowed people who could work from home to continue working from home. We kept information flowing. So I think that was really, really good. The other barriers, I think, were more so was businesses not being cloudified or digital enough. They weren't digital ready, right? So even though people could potentially work from home, those systems which are outside the immediate sphere of the telecom operators. I think COVID highlighted just the absolute necessity of that connectivity, utility you called it. That underlying thing is now an absolutely essential piece.
I think just in terms of our experience, we serve the online gaming industry quite extensively globally. And COVID, again, it was behaviour shifts. Obviously, casinos weren't opening. There wasn't any sports to bet on. So some of our business went down, but conversely, online casinos, online gambling, poker, etc., went through the roof. And so it really was peaks and troughs for us as behaviour shifted because of the people were sat at home. But as Don said, you have to accommodate for these peaks. It's what we do, and so thankfully things stood up pretty well.
Interestingly as well, we also found that SMS usage went up because supermarkets were using it to text their customers that deliveries were arriving and things like that, and actually everyone pretty much has a mobile phone that can receive a text message. You might not have a smartphone or whatever, but I found that really interesting that we were actually sort of going back in technology almost as well to rely on sort of more primitive technology.
No, and I think, Don, you've touched on the next question really, which was about the way that telecoms now is split into two functions. We've got the underlying infrastructure, the fibre in the ground, all the kit, and then you've got these over-the-top services. I was minded when I saw an article from BMW the other week where they're going to build a car that all the functions are in the car, and then a consumer will subscribe to the ones that they see fit their usage best within that car. So the car will have all the functionality. You subscribe to the service you require. I'm just wondering what you think the improvements in fibre across the island will bring in that respect, in terms of the way that people will be able to consume and have a smorgasbord of opportunities and options available to them once it's delivered.
That's definitely the direction that we're going in. It is an example of disaggregation between the utility and the service. And it's actually a good example to try and demonstrate the difference between the the utility and the criticality of that and the services that run over it. So I don't know about you guys, but I don't buy a car because it's got heated seats or a streaming radio. I buy a car to get me from A to B, right? So BMW have the opportunity to deliver the components that go into a streaming radio and thing and recover the costs at the time of that initial sale. Or when they switch on those services, they charge a premium for it, etc. So that over the top. Connectivity, that bland connectivity, that fast connectivity, has no intrinsic value until you connect it to something, to a service. Yeah? So until you say, I want a 100 gig pipe to the internet, or I want a 100 gig pipe to the cloud or whatever, until you've got that service over the top, it's pretty worthless. And that's the challenge that we've got, is that investment, that heavy capex upfront investment, without the guarantee of customers at the end of it, is a real challenge for us in this disaggregated environment.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, we've seen that. Obviously, the company that I work for owned Wimanx and has now bought an IT reseller or merged with an IT reseller purely for that. You know, it is so difficult to continue to grow in any way in that space, in the broadband and the mobile space. The margins are so challenged, we talked about before, that you have to differentiate the product offering and move into managed services, we all recognise as well. So, but yeah, I think what you're saying about consuming it, that's what everyone wants. It's just whether or not we can continue to invest at the level we are, you know, with the pressures that are on driving costs down constantly.
There's a real challenge as being an island nation and progressing at the same rate of pace in terms of certainly mobile technology. If you think about 5G, that has been, you know, the next generation of mobile technology actually. What 4G gives us as a consumer is pretty much what we need right now, and we don't really need much more from that 5G will actually bring, but 5G really helps manufacturing and autonomous vehicles when they're driving them around, which I'd like to subscribe to, like a good driver in my car, please. But actually, that investment in 5G for an island telco is massive, is huge, especially when you've got the challenges of you know, global shortages of kit and equipment, and then you've got big players that have got loads more money to be able to throw at, you know, making sure they've got their own stock. So it's really challenging for an island telecoms operator to keep advancements, when actually, you know, do we as a consumer want to pay more for 5G? Because what we have now on a phone is really what we need. We want to pay less, actually.
We do, and we're seeing challenges across the board in terms of security on those networks as well, with a lot of governments now challenging operators to remove a lot of kit that's come from China and other jurisdictions, which is adding to that cost base as well, isn't it? Really, really interesting. I've got a couple of questions in before we go to the next one. A good one here. How can we guarantee access to cloud services as a nation with limited links across the sea? I mean, that's a good one for you, Stephen.
How can we guarantee? Okay, yeah, so that's a good point. So, when the e-gaming industry started on the Isle of Man, obviously all the data centres popped up to support that. No online gaming business is going to relocate to the Isle of Man with flaky connectivity, right? It's the reason they exist. They don't have a business without it. And so back then, there was a lot of investment, obviously from a data centre perspective, connectivity. We have multiple links to the island, all of which are used by the majority of the data centres. And we have an overlay network, as do the other providers, which connects us globally from the Isle of Man. We don't rely on any one link. We don't rely on actually two links. You know, we have redundancy built into the network, and as all the other providers would do too. So, so from my perspective, those things are there, and you know, the world-class telecoms was created around e-gaming. We need to maintain that, right? We're only as good as as we are today. You know, something may happen tomorrow, and I think the reality of that, you know, is as we start to think about, okay, we're becoming more reliant on telecoms. You know, we expect it to be there like a utility. What happens when it doesn't, right? So, if you think back, when I was growing up, we had candles around the house for if the electricity went off, right, and we would go around and light the candles, and then an hour later the power would come back on, right? We don't have candles now because the electricity is reliable. It's reliable because we have a really good power station. That's a different topic. But the point is, we don't need candles today. In telecoms, people don't have candles as such, and so. But what happens if it's not there? We're becoming so reliant on it. And at a business level, you know, if mine goes off at home, my son can't play FIFA, and that's okay. But at a business level, if your business goes offline, because you only have one pipe to the internet from your office, that could be a big issue. And so as people and businesses become more reliant on it, we see people perhaps not evaluating the risk as much as they should do. So the underlying infrastructure is there to support full uptime, but you know, individuals and businesses have to assess the risk themselves.
I don't think that we've really had a problem with the underlying infrastructure, but you know, that's not really the driver for us, although we probably would seek to see government help support further investment in that. Some of those subsea cable circuits are 30 plus years old at this stage, but the other thing with that is that we've always been ahead. You know, we have been ahead. If you compare to Malta, you know, when I was at C8, there was a lot of data centres there that had 2 subsea cable links out. C8 always utilised 3 at that stage. It was one of the first connections into Marseille. From there, here the Isle of Man has had 3 for quite some time now. So we have been able to support that. I guess that question's probably led from the lack of stability over the last 6 months that has happened. So that's another question, you know, around how we achieve that. And all of us have been affected by that at times, and it's not often that it's the subsea cable links, to be honest, or the general connectivity. It's usually more to do with some sort of technical or human error at some stage as part of that, to be fair.
I mean, we've moved from 3 providers to 4 providers. We've got 7 cables now. Are you noticing anything different, Don, or are you saying that the underlying infrastructure under the sea has always been pretty good?
It's always been pretty good, but it's something that we need to keep an eye on. It is very, very UK-centric, and you know, with Brexit and thing, there are geopolitical reasons why we might want to look at different sorts of things, but nothing to add.
Brilliant. Okay, so you mentioned investment from government now. Now we have seen some investment from government in terms of the National Broadband Plan. They're investing money to try and drive fibre into the areas of the island that probably wouldn't get fibre. Do you think there's anything more the government could be doing or should be investing in that would help drive and support both the telecom sector and the digital businesses on the island? I'm not sure you'd like to pick that one up.
So, I constantly, obviously we're not we don't dig holes in the ground to put fibre, so I can talk about this quite openly. So, So outside of MT and Shaw, the biggest fibre networks are owned by the Isle of Man government. Okay, so we know part of that is commercialised with Elan Communications, the subsidiary of the NUA, but that's still a statutory board of government. So they own and run one of the off-island cables that runs adjacent to the power interconnect, and they also run a metro fibre network on island. In addition to that, the government have a number of other fibre networks across all the departments, and so I've always held the view that we should not just do more with Elan Communications. I would actually have that run by a third party on behalf of government, but I think we can also commercialise the fibre assets that government are using, and that's not just for our benefit, but for everyone's ultimately. I remember when Elan was actually introduced, the cost of off-island connectivity tumbled, and because we were able to commercialise that asset. And so I think there's a lot we can do still with what we have underground here.
I would just add that's sort of a very infrastructure level, but going back to my point on digital poverty, I think government really needs to be looking at, there are swathes of the population that we just don't see, that just have not got access to connectivity, and it stops them applying for jobs, especially if we're looking at obviously we're looking down the barrel of a gun of a looming financial crisis. So the fact that it's a cost, but also it's a necessary cost that you now need to be able to access services and be able to live your life. So.
I think from my point of view, it's the skills piece. You know, I was on the Cyber panel a couple of weeks ago talking about skills. It's a major issue for us. We're a growing company looking to expand here in the Channel Islands and in Malta at the moment, and this is the HQ for us, and getting the skills is really difficult. So there is obviously some good programs going on within government. We've got the Relocate program, which is good, where you're getting quite a substantial relocation package plus NI free for a year, etc. So, but government could definitely, the digital skills piece, if we really want to be a digital isle, we've got to look at that in much more and really focus on it. The educational piece is huge. Shelley and I have spoken about this quite a lot as well, that there's a massive gap in that, in what's happening. And obviously I've been involved in Love Tech, which is trying to contribute to it, but it has to start in the schools. It has to go back to that, and the government needs to be responsible for that we have the skills to enable us to better and do more with that. And then the other thing is, obviously, there is a lot of work being done by, particularly your department, Richard, on trying to attract digital businesses into here. And, the international outlook on that is good, but it's difficult. We have to, without the skills being here, people are coming in and they can't find the people to work for them. So, lots of companies here, see Jane from PDMS, they've had to reach out into Scotland as well, and this is what's happening, so we have to do something about that and solve that initially.
Fantastic. So, you talked about some of the issues that businesses are facing on the Isle of Man and some of the challenges they're facing outside of telecoms maybe. I've got a question here that says, what's the biggest telecom challenge in supporting a global business based on the Isle of Man? So we talked about undersea cables and maybe how they play into this, but are there any other challenges that you face in supporting global businesses to relocate here maybe?
To relocate here? Or?
Well, the question is,
I would say
what are the biggest telecom challenges supporting a global business based in the Isle of Man? But I suppose the question is to either support them while they're here or to bring them here. Maybe they're two different challenges.
Yeah, we obviously operate in a lot of the offshore jurisdictions, and the Isle of Man is obviously one of them. It's our HQ. So a number of years ago, the first answer to that would be no. It's really costly to set up business here because of the telecoms, etc. When you compare the Isle of Man to other jurisdictions, it really isn't. There are, Malta and Gibraltar, for example, are a quantum, multiple, up to 10 times the cost of telecoms here. So that really isn't a barrier. I think for any business coming to the Isle of Man now, I don't tend to hear telecoms being a barrier. It's yes, the costs are higher because we're on an island and there's a cost to cross the water, but it's negligible when you compare it to other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so the next question we've touched on already, so I'm going to move to the next one. What can industry do to help ensure the island stands out on a global stage? The actual session brief was about standing out on a global stage. Is there anything that industry can do more to try and make the island stand out on a global stage, over and above what the things the government potentially could do?
So I think we've already established, right, there isn't a technology that exists on the Isle of Man that can't be deployed anywhere else in the world, right? Technology is not the differentiator. It's how we go applying that technology, and for us it's about how we innovate around that technology, make it affordable, make it usable. I think there are areas where we can improve collectively and individually. So collaboration is an area that we agility. I think we're a very agile place to live. I used to work with Stephen. I used to work with you, actually. I didn't know you at the time, but I used to work with you, right? We know each other. We have access to members of our parliament. We have access and good relationship with our regulators, etc. So we've got an ability there to be agile and to be responsive. And we've also got the ability to be coherent. So it's, building companion strategies together across that support each other. I think that's an area that we can do. Okay, so I'll give you an example. green energy, we're not responsible for the power on the Isle of Man. But if we can get a green energy strategy that aligns with our telco strategy, we could become the first telco operators in the world that are entirely green, and that is a USP, right? And that's it. So I think there is scope, but it's not the technology and it's not the.
So I think we need to start with the Manx Internet Exchange first of all. So yeah, we can say this, but we have to have what everyone else is offering. We're in a situation where we're tromboning traffic on and off the island between each other at this stage. So there's a lot we need to do. It's definitely collaboration. And but that would be a start. And for those who don't understand, we need all the telcos to work together and say we're not going to send the traffic off. We all need to be part of this together and share the traffic on Ireland.
I've done a YouTube video just on this. So if you do want to know more about Manx Internet Exchange, Google me, because I have done. There's something on YouTube explaining why it's important and why it's internationally important. Because an internet exchange, it's for the good of the internet. It's not for the good of. Well, it's for the good of everyone, and that's that collaboration piece. Is that actually that we all benefit if we all get together and make the internet a better place.
Part of that is about sacrifices as well. One of the barriers may be, lost revenue or you have to there put collaboration above everything. Because if you compare the Isle of Man to other jurisdictions, who have an internet exchange where they're all exchanging traffic locally, and we say we want to stand out on a global stage and we don't have that. That's I think some sacrifices have to be made in order to do that.
Yeah, I think that one of the most amazing things about an internet exchange is if all the pieces of connectivity off the island were cut, we could still run an internet without any of that. I mean, not forever, but it'd give us enough time to actually figure that piece out. So, I mean, we're talking probably disastrous if we cut all the connectivity off the island, but actually that's the thing that could happen, and gives us much more resilience on that.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a question now again from the audience, and it sort of takes what we talk about to the next level. We've talked about a little bit of it already. We've got fibre rolling out. You mentioned 5G earlier. What comes next for the island? What are you seeing on the horizon that we might need to think about on the Isle of Man? Is there anything on the Isle of Man, or is fibre and 5G it at the moment?
Well, can I pick up on the green point there, which is like let's get some of our foundations right, because green energy. I mean, I just think it's personally a no-brainer, and if we can stand out and say we are green in our telecoms and how that's massive. That is globally prevalent and world leading. So, and we can do it.
And we're seeing that across the island.
I hate to get the Debbie Downer here, but there is the whole margin thing again, because that's where it comes from. Of course we want to do that. Everyone wants to see growth in sustainable energy here on the island. The government are pushing it through economic strategy. We're all trying to do what we can around it, but we're also being faced and lobbied every single day about the quality of services and how we improve that and further access to it as well. So, it's a very real challenge, it really is. So I'm also part of a company called Security who are doing IoT, and I think the Isle of Man is doing particularly well in that. So, and there's obviously the guy who many of you all know, Mike Bromwich, who was part of Partitionware, became part of Telecom and is now set up Security. And so that what's happening in the IoT space, Telecom have done incredibly well with that in the past and continue to with OV. And so I think those sort of things are where we should be looking and how we can really make the Isle of Man stand out.
So rather than the technology, it's more the applications and the services.
Has to be, yeah. As Stephen said, the basic technology is utility, so it has to be what we layer in on top of that. I don't think we're doing too bad around cloud services and things, for quite some years now. I think C8 was probably the first at that stage, but everyone is offering direct connections into the cloud, etc. So I don't think we're particularly behind, but none of that is innovative now. It's expected, and so it has to be new stuff that's coming along that we're layering on as applications.
Yeah, I don't think that utility layer is getting too almost the maximum that we need it. It's almost there with 4G with what we use it for today. 5G coming along, we'll take it up another notch. We've trialled 5G on the Isle of Man. It's fantastic. It's brilliant. There's no business case for it. No one will pay for it. Okay, so 5G will come, but it will become as an organic deployment, and it will come as specific deployments for specific use cases, like manufacturing, potentially private 5G networks. We don't know what services are going to be put over that, because we don't provide all of that. Sky have launched their Sky Glass product. Okay, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they had to throw a satellite into space at the cost of several £billion to deliver their content. All of that cost has been taken away from that content provider now. Okay, they're just going to chuck it over the internet. And we as providers have to provide the capacity, and you guys as the consumers now have to buy the right connectivity so that that works correctly. It's a shifting world.
It is a shifting world, and the next question comes about improving the infrastructure. They're asking about resiliency between the Isle of Man data centres and urban exchanges. They're asking, is our infrastructure future-proof? Is that a question maybe for...
Yes, our connectivity is future-proof, right? So the move to fibre, we want to get rid of all of the copper in the ground ultimately. Fibre will provide that very, very baseline infrastructure. The great thing about fibre is it's adaptable, so we can start smaller and it will grow, and we don't actually have to take out that infrastructure. So in terms of that, it's future-proof. The services like MPLS and things that sit on top of that, that's always going to change. We had a particularly painful event the other week. It was painful for our customers, it was painful for us. I still had sleepless nights about it. That resiliency is really at the top of our mind, right? That's the USP of telcos. 5.9's availability, that's our DNA. Yeah? So when things like that happen, we don't like it, and we will always try to work around and make sure that we learn from those issues.
That fibre aspect piece is just really key, and that investment needs to be made by the government to make sure that people do have access to fibre in those remote areas where there is no business case to do it. And then, I've lost my train of thought now, so someone else will do. It was a really good point though.
Just in terms of, is it future-proof? I think it's our job to make sure it is future-proof, right? And things are always changing, demands are changing. We talked briefly about security there, and the security landscape is constantly changing as well. So again, we have to provide the infrastructure to deal with security issues too. And so, yes, it is future-proof, but only for a certain view in the future, because we only have a certain view of what's coming down the line. So I would say yes, but it's quite a near future from our perspective.
I've remembered what I was going to say. That piece is key. That sort of fundamental putting things in the ground, and that's quite a difficult challenge to do. But the stuff on the edge that sits there can be changed and swapped out, and with the demands and with when telcos know what's coming up, they're all in this world and they all know what they're talking about. So they're seeing what's coming up and accommodating for that in their networks, definitely.
And this leads straight on from that question. Actually, it's interesting. Someone's asking a question around satellite. Now, a lot of us understand the difference between the way that satellite provides connectivity and fibre and 5G provide connectivity. They're asking whether we need to focus on a technology like fibre if satellite is going to be the way forward. Elon Musk is throwing up satellites every day. What's people's view on that?
Spoiler alert, you need fibre to actually provide satellite connectivity, because that's how it connects back into the internet. So you need you need it as well.
I think satellite connectivity has applications, and it's particularly relevant for places that have little connectivity or have challenged connectivity. And I think depending on your usage of it will depend whether it could be successful for you. If I think about our domain in the gaming space, which is very latency intolerant, so any drift in latency whatsoever is not a good thing. The latency involved with satellites passing over and handing over to each other wouldn't work in that application, but it would work for others too. So I think it's something obviously we need to keep an eye on and be aware of, but as part of a wider solution.
It's the price differential again, isn't it? We're looking at that and what are people paying for Starlink, 100 odd quid or whatever the case is. We've got people arguing over £22 a month for a broadband connection, so it's a long way off before people are going to start to accept that as a utility that can be purchased every day. Yes, there are some people who require it, want it, and are willing to pay for it and totally understand it. But I'd say a bigger proportion of the population doesn't and still wants it to be as cheap as possible. So it comes back to that. So yeah, whilst it might be, it's going to take some time.
Well, that's brought us to the end of the questions. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. I don't know if there's any questions from the floor. If anyone wants to put up a hand and ask a particular question, you've got a couple of minutes to answer them if you have. Silence. You've obviously done a good job. Just for me to say thank you then to the members of the panel for joining us today and talking through telecommunications. It's been really interesting to talk to you and listen to what you have to say. I hope everyone here has enjoyed the conversation and taken something from it. And I really hope you enjoy the rest of the day here at Digital Live 2022. Thank you.